So hello, I'm Katie. I'm with the user services team. I'm happy to be here to present the Databricks API to you today. We're going to talk about, in general, some of the different features that it has and what you might be able to, how you might be able to benefit from using it. So in Databricks, what you're looking at right now, the browser-based UI, that user interface, we use it to create notebooks, start clusters, create jobs, and do all kinds of stuff. And with each of these actions that we take in the file or whenever we are clicking on to create a notebook or share something or start a cluster, those are Databricks is making API requests on your behalf when you click those buttons. And the API is something that you also have access to, so you can programmatically do actions like these in ways that will help you to save a lot of time and frustrations and things like that. So, usually just working in the browser is totally fine, but the API can level things up a lot more where you can automate. It's, more scalable to, different tasks that you can do. So it allows you to kind of create these repeatable processes. You can integrate Databricks with other things if allowed and approved, and using service principles to manage some of your work and assets so that you don't have to depend on like one person having access to a thing or one person's token being active. This presentation is kind of intended for an intermediate or advanced audience, but so I expect the audience to kind of already know about APIs. I'm not going to cover exactly like how to use an API or things like that. But if you're a beginner and you don't know that stuff yet, I'm hoping that you can at least follow along and find it really helpful, the kinds of things that I'm going to talk about and show, because just having the code examples can be helpful. And then at the end, you can come and visit this later if you don't want to stay for the whole thing. Feel free to revisit this presentation and look at the references that I have at the end, because I put some references for people who might not know how to work with APIs yet. Excuse me. So if you're comfortable with working with JSON data, common HTTP status codes, reading and understanding documentation, and then kind of having an idea of how to work with the requests in JSON Python libraries, you should be okay to follow along, I think. And if you would like to run this notebook for yourself, clone it, there's an S3 path in there that you'll need to change, and Databricks secrets that you'll need to change. So be mindful of those things if you want to run this for yourself. And as a more specific example of why APIs are this particular API, the Databricks API, is so great is I have a screenshot here of something that users were requesting. Nobody could figure out. Once upon a time, we were trying to export as HTML. Here's one of the buttons that we click in the UI that we know there's an API call happening for, but how do we do it? How do we get to it? We couldn't really find in the documentation what was the appropriate URL to use and the parameters and all that kind of stuff, and how to retrieve the object within there that you wanted to make this happen. So exporting, when you run a job, your notebook task runs, and like this one here, this is just a screenshot, but you can see the output and the code and everything. And when you export something as HTML, you can put it back in the workspace as a notebook. And so that's what this button is for. And having to click it over and over and over manually takes a lot of time. You have a lot of screens you have to go through. If you have a lot, it's easy to miss things. So anytime you're doing anything manually, I hate doing anything manually. So I like to automate whatever possible, because then I'm less likely to make mistakes. And even if I can't automate something, I like to check it with some kind of automation. But this is sort of our concrete example of what is so great about APIs. This can save so much time and effort and headache. And our learning objectives for this presentation are to understand the structure, authentication methods, core capabilities of the Databricks API, learning how to perform common platform operations. There's the workspace API, cluster, jobs, secrets, and there's a ton more. we're going to explore one practical automation that you can probably, use right away, hopefully, to improve your Databricks experience and working with the API. So first, we're going to authenticate to the API. We'll list some clusters. We'll trigger a job run. We're going to pull it for completion, make sure that it's done before we retrieve our results. Now, the next thing that I have here are our imports, and I'm not going to cover them in detail or anything. This is just import these things if you're working with the API. And security is something that we really have to touch on when we talk about this too, because you can access and download things that may go to the wrong place. And so we just have to be careful that we're using contractor or government furnished equipment only within the appropriate network. So just approved devices, approved network, approved IDE. Just make sure everything is going where it's supposed to be, where data will be secure and things like that. Because we monitor this type of traffic, and we'll shut down access or revoke access if people are accessing outside of the network boundaries. So in the spirit of security, here is our S3 path that we're going to work with to save our export to HTML toward the end. So make sure that you're outputting any PHI, PII sensitive data. I don't know if we have title data here. Anything that is sensitive should not be on your local computer. You want to make sure that you're putting it somewhere secure, like an S3 location. This one is one that I have access to, that I am able to save test things to. So I have it, and then I do make ders to make sure that it exists if it doesn't already exist. So next thing I want to talk about are some of the prerequisites for using the Databricks API. I put the S3 location just because security is something that you have to think about all the time. But typically an API, you really just need to think about, like the host and the token is what you normally hear about when you talk about APIs. So our host, I feel like it's okay to point it out because it's always plainly on the screen when we present these things. It's right here in the URL. So if you open Databricks whenever you log in, you're seeing the host name in the URL up in your browser. So you'll want to use that first. And to get your token, there are two ways that you can do it. Up in the upper right corner of the UI browser, you usually can click on, you have your, like a little circle here, and then you can go to settings. And in there'll be developer and generate a new token. So you have to copy that token so that, because once it goes away from the screen, it's gone. It won't show it to you again. Here's a link on how to generate a token to give you a little more detail and information. You can also use the portal. There's a self-service token retrieval in the portal that you can use too. So for this notebook, since we're in Databricks, we're working from a notebook within the UI, we have to use secrets to do that. So I have documentation on the secrets. That's how you can set them and get them and everything. But here's code right here to get these secrets that I have in the workspace. And you can replace them with your own so that you can run these because you won't have access to mine. And remember, tokens, never hard code a token in a notebook or a program file. Don't, ever let them go into some kind of version control repo. I think the only one that's approved is GitHub. So don't let them go into GitHub or anything like that. So this is another security thing. Just make sure that your tokens are safe and handled appropriately for best practices on security with tokens. So if we've set our host and our token, let's do a simple API test. This one is a part of the Workspace API, and we'll just call it get status. So here I'm opening a different screen, and we have, this is the documentation that I linked up the top. Make sure that you have AWS selected on the left pane. Workspace is where you're going to find the things that you can do. So under Workspace, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can look at all the objects that you have permissions to in the Workspace, list a directory. You can, I guess, create a directory. And I have not tested all of these things for a non-admin, but I believe you all can do a lot of these things. And there is access to like some other things that you may not have access to um, in the workspace that you can get to from here, because this can filter by your permissions better than the UI shows you. So this get status, it's a very simple one. It's a get request to this URL, this endpoint here, and you just give it a path. That it just needs an absolute workspace path, and then in the response, it shows you the different kinds of objects that are the different kinds of pieces of your JSON object that will come back, and it usually will give you an example of what the sample looks like. So this is the documentation, and you may find some interesting things in here that are really helpful for like some of the list things, like we'll cover in a second. You can filter and all this other kind of stuff. But just to do a simple call, I'm getting the username programmatically. You don't need to change this for yourself. Just run that code in that cell there. And then I'm using that to check my user folder in this get status with this get status call. So headers look like normal. Params here works fine with Databricks. You can also do JSON. I have it purposely different in some of the different cells in this notebook, so you can just see what that looks like for just to have extra code samples. I'm printing the status code, and then the response JSON I'm storing in a variable that I'm calling data. And that's the same throughout this notebook. So each call that I make, I just store it in data, and you can print to see what the whole thing looks like, because in this presentation, I'm just printing select little things so that I'm not showing you too much information about workspace identifiers or any kind of things that we shouldn't be sharing too widely on a presentation. But this one, it shows me the path that I gave it, and that's correct. That's what I expected to see. It's a directory. That's also correct. And then it shows other things that are true about this my user folder. So you can get information about all different kinds of workspace objects with the API. So get clusters list. This is partly to show you that there's all these different API sort of groups. So you have the clusters API, and the structure of your URL is host, then you'll say API, and then this is a version that goes with this, like clusters version 2.1, jobs version 2.2, and then workspace version 2.0, something like that. So this version goes with this, and then I'm using the list. And this one, I don't have any parameters to put in. This one may have the filter, I think. I think this has the filter on it, where I could say, oh, I just want to see clusters that are job clusters, or I only want to see ones that are running right now, or something like that. Or I want to start my cluster because I signed in and it takes 10 minutes and I just want it to be ready when I open Databricks. So I'm putting this response into the data, and I have this also we're printing the status code just to confirm that it was successful. And then the other reason that I'm showing you the clusters is to show you how pagination works in the Databricks API, because that's a little different than an other APIs you may have dealt with. And if you haven't dealt with other APIs, it's good for you to know this is kind of weird. But there's example code at the bottom of how to work with the page token. So it's not just page equals 2, page equals 3, next page kind of thing. You have to work with a page token. So it's this very long string that you'll get, and it doesn't look typical. And I have example code for how you can navigate that. And I wanted to just point that out. So here's my example. The number of items on page 1 is 20. That's because the default is 20 for the page size. So I just opened the list clusters documentation. I can go down here. Oh, page size default 20. That's why I'm seeing count of 20. And here's what the page token looks like. Filter by. Okay, yeah. And then you can click on this when it has this little arrow, and it'll give you examples of what you can enter in to your request. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do that's really helpful. The next thing, so this is connecting back to our exporting the job notebook that has been run, and saving that somewhere. So we're going to run an existing job that already exists in the workspace. Oh, and I see there are other people in there. I'm so sorry I did not share this initially. But let me put this in the chat in case that's helpful. So I apologize about that, you guys. I'm so sorry. So running an existing job, that means that it exists in here. You click on here for jobs and pipelines, and then you have all those jobs where you can see multiple runs and you can look at the tasks in the UI and everything. And I wanted to point out here the job ID. You'll see the job ID in the URL. So I'm going to click on this. This goes to the task view of this job. But whether I'm in the runs or the tasks, you can see I have a job ID here. And this is the one that you see up here in the URL. And then you can copy it with this little button, which is nice. And then I put it in here as a variable. You can put in your own job, something so you can see something of your own. But I think everybody has access to this in the workspace because it's just a simple little job. So you all can see. And if you do jobs, run now, then it just needs a job ID to start the job. That's how it identifies it. And then I get my status code printed, 200. I store my JSON into a variable called data. And then I'm saving the run ID because we're going to use it in the next 3 cells. So I'm saving this number to use again in a second. And we're going to pull. So for run now, I think there's an API for jobs called run and wait. So it will run and it would pause this cell until it's done. But I let this cell move on. So whenever you run this request to run job now, the Databricks will move down to the next cell, or if it was in a Python file, it would move on to the next lines of code. This next is to show you how to pull the job. This is just a very simple one to check the job for its completion until it's done. And I'm checking if it's done by its state is not running. I'm using import time so that we can wait. I'm waiting 60 seconds. This try except is just so you have a run ID in here in case you ran this and it just didn't, it didn't work or something, or it wasn't there if you ran it after, and didn't run the above thing. So this may take, this would take a bit of time if you're running something now, but if you run this cell right this second, or if you ran with this ID, then it would just tell you, oh, okay, it's done. But I'll get back to that in a second. So here's our URL. Here's another way that you can include parameters in. So I have get. This is this part here is that URL that you would see in the documentation, and then here I have parameter run ID. And that's one of the ways that you can do that. So after I do my request, I save my JSON into data. And here I'm using data.get because sometimes state doesn't exist or it doesn't have all of the pieces within it. It depends on what the state is. So sometimes you have to be a little careful with this, otherwise you'll get an error. So if state exists, then I want to see lifecycle state and result state. And if it is running, here you see where I ran this and it checked it a whole bunch of times until it was done. And at the very end, it said lifecycle state terminated. There are a lot of different options for this. It can be canceled, if by the user or by something else. It could fail and all that stuff. So result state was success. Yay, that's what we want to see. So now that it's completed, we go to the next API call where we retrieve the results. And this is where we want to also think about where we're saving our things. If it's if it's a notebook, you can save that in the workspace because we keep our notebooks in the workspace. So if you have a notebook that you're retrieving, the workspace is an acceptable place for it to go, even if it has output. So, but I'm showing you how to do S3 because that one is not as straightforward as if you saved it in the workspace. So that's why I wanted to give you the example code for that. Here we have the try except again, just to make sure you have a run ID to work with. And we have output file name. I'm just calling it run export. You can call it what you want if you wanted to use this code. And then we have the jobs runs export, and we have params run ID. And these were very finicky when I first figured out how to do this. So I haven't really played around with this too much because about a year ago, nothing else would work except this. So and that could be, a user error, of course, but yeah, feel free to play around with that and figure out what works best for you and your team. So and then you can look at the documentation to see if there's anything else that, would be helpful for you to know for the parameters that you can use to export your notebooks and everything. And again, remember, it's an HTML. It has to be .html, especially if your format is HTML, because the data, it gives you a part called views, and you want to get the first one. This is just, there's only one in this case, and you would loop through different tasks if you had multiple tasks to get the output. And then content, and content contains HTML. So we're saving it as an HTML file. We're writing it to the file that we called above, and we're going to put it in temp. That means it's getting saved to the cluster. And then also note that whenever you do that, you refer to the file with just /temp. And then note that down here, we're going to copy it. So when we refer to reading it so that it gets copied over to S3, we need to add that file : in front. It's just the way that our environment is set up. And then so we save it to the cluster, and then it gets copied to S3. And here I have a listing so that you can see I successfully did that here. And if I open this and import it into the workspace, I can see the notebook. It looks as expected and everything, because the HTML files can get imported. This is the special type of HTML file that can get imported into the workspace. So in conclusion, this topic was sort of intended for more advanced users, but if you're not there yet and you're still hanging around at the end of the presentation here, I hope you found something helpful. There was something you could take away that you can maybe immediately look at for your own team or consider for your own team. The API documentation is not too bad. So you should be able to use that to kind of look and see all the different things that are available to you. I definitely would advise you to check out the list jobs, or sorry, not list jobs. The under Lakeflow, there will be jobs, and there's the jobs API and all the different things that you can do. You can create your jobs new. So that's a nice thing to be able to recreate a job if something happens to it, or if you need to start fresh for whatever reason. But yeah, the API, it really shines when you have to do some kind of integration or automation, or you need to start scaling things. And it also just, getting rid of any of those manual steps. We covered all of the learning objectives. We did some sort of some hands-on exploration of that API, covering the structure, how to authenticate to it, using it to interact programmatically with different things like the workspace, the clusters, the jobs. And you see how these can be applied to automate some routine things and integrate into some of the things that you might be doing every day. And I also want to point out, before I hand it back to Laura, the references down here, new to APIs, here's a few references to kind of get you. I reviewed this. I read this page. I skimmed it, and it looked okay. So I wanted to share that resource. And then the additional code examples, there's a lot down here that I wanted to share. And in case you got started and got stuck, or wanted to start working a little more locally, or if you're working with Git, some kind of Git provider or anything like that. So thank you so much for joining.